Welcome to Mayhem CEDH, where questionable decks meet questionable pilots. This week, we've got a pod with a win that I don't think anybody who sat down at this table saw coming. With that being said, let's check out the pod today. First, we have Kaylin on Rashmi Draw Go, which seeks to use Rashmi to turn all spells into cantrips, control the board, and end in a combo finish. Jack on Shorikai You Are My Darling, a polymorph deck that seeks to land an early Shorikai, control the board, and win with Hullbreaker Horror. Evan on Sen Triplets Stacks, a stacks list that slows down the table, accrues additional resources with its commander, and wins with one of its compact combos. And finally, Craft on KCI Teshar, a combo deck that seeks to assemble a combo with its commander to quickly kill the table. And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let us begin. But Jack has a pre-game action and puts Gemstone Caverns into play, exiling an island. Kaylin draws and plays a tropical island for turn. He casts a Birds of Paradise. He casts a Mox Diamond. It enters and Kaylin pitches a land. He passes. Jack draws and plays a Polluted Delta for turn. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up a Pact of Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Moonsnare Prototype. He follows it up with a Springleaf Drum. Jack passes. Evan draws and plays an Otawara Soaring City for turn. He casts a Mystic Remora. Evan passes. Craft draws and plays an Arid Mesa for turn. Eyeing the Mystic Remora, Craft passes. Kaylin draws and plays an Island for turn. He casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. Kaylin passes. Jack draws and plays a Prismatic Vista for turn. He cracks it, paying a life and fetching up an island onto the battlefield. He also casts his commander, Shorikai, Genesis Engine, not paying for Evan's Remora. Jack passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Shine Shadow Snarl, revealing a swamp for it to enter untapped. He casts a Soul Ring. Evan passes. Craft draws, glares at the Remora, moves to discard, and passes. Kaylin draws and plays a Wooded Foothills for turn. Kaylin also passes. Jack draws and activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He casts Counterbalance, not paying for Evan's Remora. It resolves, and Jack passes the turn. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan pays for his Remora. He plays an island for turn. Seeing nothing else to do, Evan passes. Craft draws and cracks Arid Mesa, paying a life and fetching up a Plains onto the battlefield. He casts a Hope of Girapur. At the end of Craft's turn, Kaylin casts Natural State, targeting Counterbalance, not paying for Evan's Remora. Rashmi and Counterbalance both trigger. Counterbalance reveals a Mox Diamond, and in response to the Rashmi trigger, Kaylin cracks Wooded Foothills, paying a life and fetching up a forest onto the battlefield. Rashmi reveals a Jeweled Lotus into Kaylin's hand, Counterbalance is destroyed, and the turn moves to Kaylin. Kaylin draws, holds up interaction, and passes. Jack draws and casts Unwinding Clock, not paying for Evan's Remora. In response, Evan casts Negate, countering Unwinding Clock. Jack passes. At the end of Jack's turn, Evan casts Enlightened Tutor. He fetches up a Counterbalance of his own onto the top of his library. The turn then moves to Evan. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Scalding Tarn for turn. He casts Deafening Silence. Evan passes. Craft draws, sighs ever harder at Evan's board state, moves to discard, and passes. Kaylin draws, continues to hold up interaction, and passes. Jack draws and activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He plays a Command Tower for turn. At the end of Jack's turn, Evan cracks Scalding Tarn, paying a life and fetching up a Hollowed Fountain onto the battlefield tapped. The turn moves to Evan. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan finally lets his Mystic Remora die. He draws and plays a Swamp for turn. He casts Demonic Tutor. In response, Kaylin hardcasts Force of Negation, targeting Demonic Tutor. Rashmi triggers, and Kaylin reveals a Soul Ring into his hand. Demonic Tutor is countered and exiled, and Evan passes the turn. Craft draws and plays a Crystal Vein. He plays a Memnite. He plays a Mox Opal. Craft passes. Kaylin draws and casts a Sensei's Divining Top. Rashmi triggers, and Kaylin reveals a Nature's Claim into his hand. Kaylin passes. Jack draws and plays a Cephaly Coliseum for turn. He casts a Talisman of Progress. He activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. The turn moves to Evan. Evan draws and casts a Narset, Parter of Veils. It resolves, and Evan downticks Narset. In response, Craft casts Unexpectedly Absent, targeting Deafening Silence where X equals 0. Then, Narset's ability resolves. Evan looks at the top 4 cards of his library, revealing Deafening Silence into his hand, and then puts the rest onto the bottom in a random order. He recasts Deafening Silence. Evan passes. Kraft draws and moves to combat. He attacks Narset with Hope of Ghirapur. Narset goes to 2, and in his second main phase, Kraft casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks Jeweled Lotus to help cast his commander, Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle. Kraft passes. At the end of Kraft's turn, Kalen spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Kalen draws and plays a Flooded Strand for turn. He cracks it, paying a life and fetching up an island onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring. Rashmi triggers and Kalen reveals a Talisman of Curiosity into his hand. Kalen moves to combat and attacks Narset with Rashmi. Narset dies, and Kalen passes the turn. Jack draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps Ancient Tomb to activate Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He casts a Manifold Key. Jack passes. Evan draws and casts his commander, Sen Triplets. In response, Jack activates Manifold Key, untapping Shorikai. He activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. Sen Triplets resolves, and Evan follows it up with a Counterbalance. In response, Kalen casts Intuition, targeting Kraft. Rashmi triggers, and Kalen reveals a Gemstone Caverns into his hand. He fetches up a Counterspell, Fierce Guardianship, and Mana Drain. Kraft chooses Fierce Guardianship to go to Kalen's hand, and the rest go to Kalen's graveyard. Counterbalance resolves, and the turn moves to Kraft. Kraft draws and casts a Mirror Retriever. Counterbalance and Teshar both trigger. Counterbalance reveals a Thran Quarry, and Teshar returns Skyscanner to the battlefield. It enters, and Kraft draws. Then Mirror Retriever resolves. Kraft passes. Kalen draws and plays a Gemstone Caverns for turn. He casts a Talisman of Curiosity. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Kalen spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Kalen reveals an Unsubstantiate into his hand through Rashmi. He casts a Llanowar Elves. Kalen passes. Jack draws and activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He plays an island for turn. He activates Manifold Key, untapping Shorikai. He reactivates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. Jack passes. At the end of Jack's turn, Kalen casts Resculpt, targeting Sen Triplets. Evan declines the Counterbalance trigger, and Rashmi triggers, revealing a Breeding Pool into Kalen's hand. Sen Triplets is exiled, and Evan creates a 4/4 elemental token. The turn moves to Evan. Evan draws and plays a Thran Quarry for turn. He casts Aura of Silence. It resolves, and Evan passes. Kraft draws and moves to combat. He swings everything at Evan. Evan takes it, and in his second main phase, Kraft plays an Ancient Den for turn. He casts Oswald Fiddlebender. It resolves, and Kraft passes the turn. At the end of Kraft's turn, Kalen spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. The turn moves to Kalen. Kalen draws and puts a Breeding Pool into play tapped. He casts a 3-mana Mystic Remora. Rashmi triggers, and Kalen reveals a Paradigm Shift into his hand. Kalen passes. Jack draws and plays a Marsh Flats for turn. He cracks it, paying a life and fetching up a Prairie Stream onto the battlefield. He activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He casts Blind Obedience, not paying for Kalen's Remora. Jack passes. Evan draws and plays a Chromatic Lantern, not paying for Kalen's Remora, which enters tapped due to Blind Obedience. He plays a Swamp for turn. Evan passes. Kraft draws and activates Oswald, sacrificing Mirror Retriever. Mirror Retriever triggers, and Kraft returns Jeweled Lotus to his hand. He fetches up a Semblance Anvil onto the battlefield, imprinting Jeweled Lotus. Kraft moves to combat and attacks Kalen with Hope of Ghirapur. Before damage, Kalen spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Still in response, Kalen flips top, drawing a card and putting top back on top of his library. Still in response, Kalen casts Rapid Hybridization, targeting Hope of Ghirapur. Rashmi triggers and reveals Sensei's Divining Top into Kalen's hand. Hope is destroyed, and Kraft creates a 3/3 Frog Lizard token. In his second main phase, Kraft casts Mox Amber, which enters tapped due to Blind Obedience, not paying for Kalen's Remora. Teshar triggers and returns Mirror Retriever to the battlefield. He casts a Glinthawk. Counterbalance triggers, and Evan reveals a Phyrexian Metamorph. Glinthawk enters, and Kraft returns Memnite to his hand. He recasts Memnite. Teshar triggers, and Kraft returns Hope of Ghirapur to the battlefield. Kraft passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Kalen pays for his Remora. He draws and plays an island for turn. He recasts Sensei's Divining Top. Rashmi triggers, and Kalen reveals a Pact of Negation into his hand. Kalen moves to discard and passes. At the end of Kalen's turn, Jack activates Manifold Key, untapping Shorikai. He activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. The turn moves to Jack. Jack draws and activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He activates Manifold Key, untapping Shorikai. He activates Shorikai again, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He casts a Mana Vault, paying for Kalen's Remora. Jack passes. At the end of Jack's turn, Kalen casts Noxious Revival, targeting Rapid Hybridization. Rashmi triggers and reveals a Thassa's Oracle into Kalen's hand. Rapid Hybridization is put to the top of Kalen's library, and the turn moves to Evan. Evan draws and casts Phyrexian Metamorph. It enters as a copy of Sensei's Divining Top. He spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Evan passes. Craft draws and moves to combat. He attacks Kalen with Hope of Ghirapur. Before damage, Kalen casts Unsubstantiate, targeting Hope. Rashmi triggers, revealing Rapid Hybridization into Kalen's hand. Hope of Ghirapur is bounced to Craft's hand, and in his second main phase, Craft recasts Hope of Ghirapur. Teshar triggers and returns Foundry Inspector to the battlefield. He casts Grinding Station, not paying for Kalen's Remora. He follows it up with an Aethersworn Canonist. It enters, and with Grinding Station's untap trigger on the stack, Evan sacrifices Aura of Silence, destroying Grinding Station. Craft activates Oswald, sacrificing Aethersworn Canonist. He fetches up a Blasting Station onto the battlefield tapped. Craft passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Kalen pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Polluted Delta for turn. He casts a Seasons Past, targeting Flooded Strand, Noxious Revival, Force of Negation, and Resculpt in his graveyard. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Jack casts Swan Song, targeting Seasons Past. Seasons Past is countered, Rashmi reveals an Arcane Signet into Kalen's hand, and Kalen creates a 2/2 bird. Kalen passes. Jack draws and casts Hullbreaker Horror. It resolves and Blasting Station untaps. Jack follows it up with a Jeweled Lotus, targeting Deafening Silence, not paying for Kalen's Remora. Counterbalance triggers and reveals a Caves of Koilos, countering Jeweled Lotus. In response to Hullbreaker's trigger, Kalen casts Rapid Hybridization, targeting Hullbreaker Horror. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Jack activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. Rashmi reveals a Windswept Heath into Kalen's hand, Hullbreaker Horror is destroyed, Jack creates a 3/3 Frog Lizard, and Deafening Silence is bounced to Evan's hand. Jack plays a Manamo, School at Water's Edge for turn. He casts a Torpor Orb, not paying for Kalen's Remora. Jack passes the turn. Evan draws and plays a Caves of Koilos for turn. He recasts Deafening Silence, not paying for Kalen's Remora. In response, Jack pays a life and casts Force of Will, exiling Fabricate, targeting Deafening Silence, not paying for Kalen's Remora. Deafening Silence is countered, and Evan recasts his commander, Sen Triplets. He spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Evan passes. At the end of Evan's turn, Kalen casts Brainstorm. Rashmi triggers, and Kalen reveals a Regrowth into his hand. Kalen draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Still at the end step, Kalen cracks his Polluted Delta, paying a life. In response, Craft activates Blasting Station, sacrificing Memnite, killing Birds of Paradise. Kalen fetches up a Mystic Sanctuary onto the battlefield. It enters and puts Seasons Past back on top of Kalen's library. Still at the end step, Kalen casts Nature's Claim, destroying Semblance Anvil. Still at the end step, Jack activates Manifold Key, untapping Shorikai. He activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. He activates Manamo, untapping Shorikai. He reactivates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. The turn moves to Craft. Craft draws and casts Mox Diamond. Teshar and Counterbalance both trigger. In response to Counterbalance, Evan spins top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. He reveals a Plains, countering the Mox Diamond. Teshar returns Aethersworn Canonist to the battlefield. Craft activates Oswald, sacrificing Mox Amber. He fetches up a Portable Hull. It enters and exiles Torpor Orb. Craft moves to combat and attacks Kalen with Hope of Ghirapur. Before damage, Kalen casts Chain of Vapor, targeting Hope. Rashmi triggers and reveals a Yavimaya Coast into his hand. Hope is bounced, and Craft chooses not to continue the chain. In his second main phase, Craft sacrifices Mirror Retriever to Blasting Station, pinging Jack for 1. Mirror Retriever triggers and returns Memnite to Craft's hand. Craft casts Memnite. Counterbalance and Teshar trigger. Counterbalance counters Memnite, and Teshar returns Mirror Retriever to the battlefield, untapping Blasting Station. Craft presents a loop of using Memnite and Mirror Retriever, combined with Teshar, to infinitely buy back and sacrifice to Blasting Station. Seeing the writing on the wall, the table concedes, and Craft wins the game. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to catch future videos, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.